reading today comes from 2 Samuel chapter 9, verses 1 through 13. David asked, "Is there anyone still left in the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" Now there was a servant of Saul's household named Ziba. They summoned him to appear before David, and the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" "At your service," he replied. The king asked, "Is there no one still alive from the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness?" Ziba answered the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan. He is lame in both feet." "Where is he?" the king asked. Ziba answered, He is at the house of Machir, son of Amiel, in Lo-debar." So King David had him brought from Lo-debar, from the house of Machir, son of Amiel. When Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor. David said, "Mephibosheth." "At your service," he replied. "Don't be afraid," David said to him, "for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your father Saul, and you will always eat at my table." Mephibosheth bowed down and said, "What is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me?" Then the king summoned Ziba, Saul's steward, and said to him, "I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him and bring in the crops, so that your master's grandson may be provided for. And Mephibosheth, grandson of your master, will always eat at my table." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, "Your servant will do whatever my lord the king commands his servant to do." So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son named Micah, and all the members of Ziba's household were servants of Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table. He was lame in both feet. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
You may be seated.
So this morning, our bottom line is this: honor others by keeping your promises. That seems easy enough, right? We all know what a promise is. We all know that there are times when we probably should or could make a promise. But we also know that there are times when we probably shouldn't. Now, I have an associate's degree, actually, in criminal justice, which I think is very beneficial when you're going to be a pastor in a church. You should have a little criminal justice in your background, I think. I think that's a good thing. So, one of the classes that I had to take was this class. I can't remember the name of the class, but it was probably one of my favorite classes. And the particular professor that we had was a favorite of mine and some friends of mine who were kind of met during school. And what he did during this class was he would set up different scenarios that you had to do, that you may encounter if you followed through and actually got a job in criminal justice, which I feel I have. So like we would show up for class, and he would have the room, furniture's tipped over, and people, a couple people had come in and they kind of looked ramshackled, and we would have to then pair up and knock on the door like we were police officers showing up to a domestic violence call. Or we would show up and he had the room set up where we were police officers and we were pulling someone over. And sometimes he was very nice and polite and followed all of the instructions, and sometimes he was belligerent. And we got to see and kind of walk through those different situations. Well, I had no desire to be a police officer. My hope was to be a juvenile probation officer. So one time we came in and there was a desk set up and some chairs and stuff, and we were given just a little bit of information. That little bit of information was we were juvenile probation officers. And the juvenile that we were going to talk to had some issues, but nobody could get through and figure out what exactly was going on in this kid's life. The fun thing was that you got to sit as the class, got to watch each of us go up. So we kind of got to learn different strategies from each other and how each of us did or handled different situations. So I sat back and was watching, and we all were given the same information. Just basic, that's it. But I watched as each one of my classmates would go and they would sit at the desk, and our professor, who was playing the role of the juvenile, would come in and sit, and there was this whole thing going on. And I watched them make promises that had they ever been in that real life situation, they would have never been able to keep. But they were trying to get information, right? Because they're trying to figure out, and you got your professor there, and you got the whole class is watching you. So you want to be the one who gets up there and cracks, right? And cracks the juvenile and gets the information and all of those things. Well, I watched and watched, and then finally it was my turn. And this is not about me bragging about something great that I did one time in class. But having 5 children helps just a little bit when you want to crack a juvenile and figure out what's really going on. So I did my thing, but I did one thing that was different from the majority of the class. I never made one promise. Never once did I make a promise. Because I knew, even in practice, that once you get into the habit of making promises you can't keep, it kind of starts to be a lifestyle. It's like any other habit, right? And I knew that if I ever went into that field and never got that job, never got the opportunity to work with a juvenile, that these were promises I would never be able to keep. And the quickest way you want to lose credibility with anybody is to make promises you know from the get-go you'll never be able to keep. Right? I think we get caught up sometimes in the moment and make promises. Granted, sometimes we make them and we are able to keep them. And those are the good times. That's when you're like, yes, I can follow through with this. This is something I can do. I promise you that this is going to happen. But then there's those times when we have all good intentions. We're pretty sure we can follow through. This is a promise that we want to make and we want to be able to fulfill it, right? But sometimes we get into that situation where to fulfill this promise, all the stars in the universe have to align, right? Life has to go just the right way. Everything has to work out for you to be able to have the time, the money, the whatever to fulfill that promise. But when you made it, it was with good intentions. You really wanted to follow through, but just sometimes life gets in the way. And then there's those other times, right? Where you're busy and life's going on and whatever the situation is, and you have somebody who really needs something, really wants something, and they're kind of, badgering you a little bit about, come on, you're really good at this, blah, 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 I need your help. And they're just like, do, right? And the only thing you really want at that moment is for them to quit talking. So sometimes we make promises just to get out of the situation we're in. And then it's minutes, maybe half an hour later, and then you finally get to settle down and take a breath, and then you're like, oh, what did I just do? Now I gotta, add this one thing to my long list of other things I have to do, right? And sometimes you're just like, well, I'll do my best and see what I can do. And sometimes you're able to pull it out, and you're able to follow through on what you said you would do. Now, I'm sure none of you do this last one, but I'll share it just in case. I don't know about you, but I'm going to just make a sweeping gesture that the majority of people in here are parents. Or you've seen a child at some point in your life, right? And you know that when they're toddlers and they're little, you make all kinds of promises to get them to do whatever you want them to do. Teresa knows what I'm talking about, right? You'll give them, at 9:30 at night, you will make any promise in the world you can come up with to get that child to go to sleep. Right? True. It's true. Very true. Now, sometimes when you make that promise, really, do you have any intention of really following through on that promise? Probably not, right? So, we do that. We make promises sometimes that we never intend to keep. Never intend to keep. David and Jonathan each talked a little bit about their relationship last week. And he talked about the fact that the more success that David got, the more jealous Saul got, right? more jealous that Saul got, the more that he wanted to kill David. Now, Jonathan is Saul's son. And most of us would think that he should be aligned with his dad, right? His dad, Saul is king. If Jonathan would just follow his dad's lead and play his cards right, he may get the opportunity to be king. But Jonathan knows, where David's heart is. Jonathan knows that David has a heart for God. And Jonathan has a heart for God. And Saul has a heart for Saul. And Jonathan knows the difference. He sees the difference. If we look at 1 Samuel 20, it says, "But show me unfailing kindness, like the Lord's kindness, as long as I live, so that I may not be killed. Do not ever cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth." Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord call David's enemies to account." Jonathan, at this point, and David are having a conversation about whether Saul's really trying to kill David. And Jonathan is going to do something. He's going to have a conversation with Saul to try to feel Saul out, to see where Saul is in all of this. But this is a conversation that Jonathan's having with David, and they're trying to figure out how that conversation is going to go. And then they come up with a way for Jonathan then to let David know whether it's safe to come back or if he should run. But Jonathan here is letting David know, I have your back. I will always take care of you. If I have anything to do about it, my father will never get his hands on you. But then he asks David for something in return. His kindness. Always show kindness to me and to my family. It says, Jonathan asked David to keep a promise to treat his children kindly in the future. And then if we look a little bit further in 1 Samuel, it says, "And Saul's son Jonathan went to David, helped him find strength in God. Don't be afraid," he said. "My father Saul will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you. Even my father Saul knows this." The two of them made a covenant before the Lord. Then Jonathan went home, but David remained. At this time, at this point in the story, David is in hiding. But Jonathan, he takes the risk of really angering Saul, and he seeks David out because he wants to be in prayer with David over the situation. He comes, he seeks out his friend, and then he builds him up. Let's pray. Let's ask God for guidance, for strength, for all of those things. He is putting God in what God wants ahead of what Saul wants, what most men in this situation would want. He has the opportunity to be king. And he's building David up. And so he says, I will be second to you. Now they think that this may have been the last time that David and Jonathan were actually together. As true friends, they were more than just companions. They enjoyed each other's company, but they encouraged each other's faith in God and trusted each other with their deepest thoughts and closest confidences. These are the marks of true friendship. A friend is going to build you up. When whatever life hits you with, you're curled up on a ball on the floor, a friend is going to pick you up and always guide you closer to God. Now, in this time, when this was going on, what was the norm for that was when something would happen to the king. So, they're in battle, and Saul is critically wounded. 3 of his sons, including Jonathan, are killed. And Saul asks his shield bearer to take his sword and run him through. And his shield bearer won't. So Saul takes his own sword and falls on it. And then his shield bearer takes his own sword and falls on it. So now King Saul is dead. So eventually there needs to be a messenger, and a messenger takes this news to David. And he finds out that in the same battle on the same day, that not only did Saul die, but Jonathan died as well. Believe me when I say he doesn't take it well. And this could be where we got the phrase, I'm not saying that it is, but it could be where we got the phrase, don't kill the messenger, because that's exactly what David does. Now, in that time, what would be the norm for them would be the king, who is now going to be David, would then find all descendants of Saul, all of his children, all of his grandchildren, greats if he's got them, and they would kill them, because they don't want any descendants growing up and then coming back after the kingdom. But that's not how David works. David showed kindness. He showed kindness to Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth was afraid to visit the king. David, who wanted to treat him like a prince. Although he feared for his life and may have felt unworthy, it didn't mean that he should refuse David's gift. You also have to remember, take into account, that any kind of birth defect or handicap, if that's the right word to use, would also not have been favored. No one would have wanted a king who is lame in both feet. So he probably grew up his whole life probably feeling very unworthy. Now, also something to just kind of let roll around in your mind is that he was actually 5. Mephibosheth was 5 when Saul and Jonathan and his uncles were killed. He was immediately taken into hiding and was kept hidden away. And when he's brought to David, he's an adult. He's a father already. When God graciously offers us forgiveness of sins and a place in heaven, we may feel unworthy, but we will receive these gifts if we accept them. A reception, even warmer than the one David gave Mephibosheth, awaits for all who receive God's gifts. Not because we deserve it, but because God promised. We look at Ephesians 2, verses 8 and 9. It says, "For it is by grace you have been saved, through faith. This is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God." David's treatment of Mephibosheth shows his integrity as a leader who accepted his obligation to show love and mercy. His generous provision for Jonathan's son goes beyond any political benefit he might have received. Do we show compassion to people who have wronged us or we feel have wronged us? Each time we do, our character is strengthened. David made a promise. He made a promise to Jonathan. And I don't know the exact number of years from the time the promise was made until the promise was carried out, but he never forgot the promise that he made. And when he was able to fulfill it, years later, he did. There's some questions in the bulletin, and we try to come up with those questions each week regarding whatever the sermon is going to be about. One of those questions is, have you ever broken a promise to God? Now, I'm just going to clarify real quick. The promises that I'm talking about, these aren't promises that after a night of maybe having too much of anything, let's say alcohol or perhaps shellfish or, just anything that may make the stomach go a little grumbly, right? And you're laying in the bathroom and you pray to God that you'll never do whatever you just did that got you there again. That's not the kind of God promise I'm talking about this morning. Have you ever made a promise to God? Have you broken that promise? If you remember nothing about this morning or about this sermon, if you slept through the majority of it, please remember this. It doesn't matter how many promises you make to God and then for whatever reason, life gets in the way, and you don't feel like you have fulfilled that promise, or you feel like you've outright broken that promise. The promise that God made to you through Jesus Christ, allowing his Son to come to earth to die for all of us, that promise is yours regardless of whatever promises you've made and broken to him. It doesn't matter if you accepted Jesus Christ when you were 3 years old and you lived to be 103. The promise that he made to you is still good. It doesn't matter if in that 100 years of your life, if you've broken, made 100 times, 1,000 times promises to God. The promise he made to you is still yours. The gift is still yours. All you have to do is open it and accept it. Honor others by keeping promises. Honor God